Everyone laughed at me, whispered behind my back, and doubted my worth. Little did they know, I'm the one who signs the paychecks they depend on. I still remember the first time their words cut through me like a cold wind, though at the time, I hardly recognized the sting. It was at the kitchen table, morning light spilling across the faded linoleum, and my granddaughter, barely 12, looked at me with that impatient frown she had perfected over the years. "You never get anything right, Grandma," she said, as casually as if she were naming the color of the sky. I smiled, trying to hide the tremor in my hands. I had made the cinnamon rolls, the ones she used to adore, the ones my late husband used to say were worth a lifetime. But she didn't see that. She only saw what she wanted, my mistakes, my slow ways, the cracks that life had left in me. I had always been a trusting soul. I believed in goodness, in people, in family. I believed that love was enough to shield me from the harshness of life. I had spent decades giving, nurturing, listening, and forgiving. I believed my family would see my heart before they saw my imperfections. But life has a quiet way of showing you the truth, doesn't it? It started with small things. Forgotten invitations, subtle jabs about my spending habits, comments about how I shouldn't get involved in matters I don't understand. And slowly, the sharp little words began to weigh heavier. I would lie awake at night, wondering if they saw me at all, or only the version they wanted to see. I remember the first Sunday I stayed silent during family lunch. Normally, I would chatter about trivial things, offer advice, laugh at a joke. But that day, I just watched. Their words swirled around me like a storm I couldn't escape, and I felt a heaviness settle in my chest. It wasn't anger yet, it was something subtler, a quiet ache that settled into the corners of my heart. I wanted to speak, to defend myself, to show them that their judgment was wrong. But I couldn't. I was a grandmother. My role, as I had been taught, was to soothe, to guide gently, to give without expecting returns. And so I smiled, nodded, and carried on as if their disapproval didn't matter. But it did matter. Every careless word, every smirk, every rolling eye lodged itself somewhere inside me. I could feel it, slowly gathering, not bitterness, not yet, but a deep, quiet hurt that began to shape the way I saw the world. And yet, even in that quiet pain, I found a small flicker of something else, a sense that perhaps life's lessons weren't always about defending yourself loudly. Perhaps the true strength lay in watching, in noticing, and in holding onto your dignity when no one else seemed to value it. That morning, as I cleared the breakfast dishes alone, I felt it settle within me. The world might label me a failure, but I was still here. I was still me. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start paying attention, not to their words, but to the life I had quietly been building all along. I began noticing the quiet murmurs long before anyone admitted them aloud. It started with small things. A phone call ended abruptly when I entered the room, a hushed laugh that stopped when my shadow fell across the hallway, a glance exchanged between my children that carried a meaning I wasn't meant to understand. At first, I thought it was my imagination. I had lived long enough to know the mind plays tricks, that perhaps I was being too sensitive, too cautious. But the feeling wouldn't go away. It clung to me, subtle and persistent, like the soft echo of a word you can't quite catch but know is there. Then came the invitations I never received, my son's business lunches, my daughter's weekend gatherings with friends, even small family celebrations. I was present in their lives, yes, but only as a shadow, someone to nod politely and smile when needed. They spoke over me, about me, sometimes with a careless cruelty that left a cold pit in my chest. "Grandma shouldn't worry her pretty little head about this," I overheard my daughter say one afternoon, voice low, but sharp enough to make my ears burn. I sat silently on the worn couch, gripping the armrests until my knuckles whitened. The words were like tiny needles, each one threading a subtle message. I didn't belong here in the decisions that mattered, in the matters that counted. I had always been patient, trusting that love would protect me, but suddenly, love felt conditional, fragile, almost like a mirage. What hurt most wasn't that they dismissed me, it was that they had no idea how wrong they were. They couldn't see the quiet influence I had accumulated over decades, the knowledge, the experience, the countless small decisions that had shaped our family and our future. And in their ignorance, they betrayed me with laughter, whispers, and secrecy. Yet I didn't lash out. I didn't storm into the room and demand recognition or respect. I remembered the long afternoons spent teaching my grandchildren to bake bread, to write thank you notes, to speak kindly even when misunderstood. I remembered the long nights of comforting my children when the world was harsh. My strength, I realized, had never come from confrontation, it had always come from patience, observation, and quiet endurance. So I began to watch, not as a participant, but as an observer. I listened closely to conversations, noticed the subtle ways my family's greed or selfishness emerged, how they measured others by what they could gain. I paid attention to silences as much as words, to the spaces between laughter where truth sometimes hid. And with every passing day, I began to understand, not in anger, not in hurt, but in clarity, just how much they had underestimated me. By the end of that long, quiet week, I realized something essential. I didn't need to demand respect, not yet. I only needed to recognize my own worth, to understand the quiet power I held in ways they could not even imagine. The whispers, the secrecy, the betrayal, they were theirs to carry, not mine. And in that understanding, I felt the first flicker of something I hadn't felt in years: calm, quiet strength. It was the beginning of a new awareness, that life's injustices are often revealed not with shouting, but with silence, patience, and careful observation. And in that silence, I began to see the path forward. By the time I entered my 70th year, I had learned that silence often speaks louder than words. After the whispers, the exclusion, and the subtle betrayals, I no longer rushed to defend myself. Instead, I became a careful observer, a quiet witness to the ebb and flow of my family's lives, and, quietly, to my own power within it. I spent long afternoons in my favorite armchair, knitting, watching my grandchildren play, or simply listening to the hum of our home. I observed not just the words but the silences between them, the moments when a glance lingered too long, when a smirk betrayed a hidden intention. I noticed patterns, the way decisions were made, the way promises were broken, the way greed and insecurity dictated behavior. One evening, as my son bragged about his new venture to a visiting friend, I listened closely. He spoke with such confidence, painting a picture of control and authority, but I knew better. I could see the cracks beneath his pride, the small ways he depended on people who would never acknowledge the one quietly holding the threads together. It was in those quiet moments that the realization began to take shape. Not with fanfare or confrontation, but slowly, like sunlight seeping through fog, I had more influence than anyone in that house realized. I had built, managed, and nurtured the systems that kept the family, and even their business connections, running. Decisions they thought were theirs were often guided by foundations I had laid long ago. And then, one afternoon, a detail came to me almost by accident. My granddaughter, in a careless comment, mentioned a meeting with a certain CEO, someone I had known casually for years through charitable projects. She laughed, unaware. I can't believe Grandma signs his paychecks sometimes and he doesn't even know it. I froze. My knitting fell quietly to my lap. Could it be true? The threads I had woven over decades, the investments, the letters of support, the advice shared in passing, had shaped outcomes far beyond our home. I realized that I had quietly touched lives and decisions in ways that even the most confident family members could not imagine. I didn't feel triumph or the need to announce my discovery. Instead, a calm clarity settled over me. I understood that power and influence are not always loud, sometimes, they are subtle, patient, invisible. And sometimes, the world's underestimation of you is what gives you the quiet strength to endure and ultimately, to rise. For the first time in years, I felt free from the burden of their judgment. Their words, their sneers, their secretive whispers, they no longer defined me. I had discovered something more important: my own dignity, my own worth, and the gentle but undeniable impact I had on the world. And so, I waited. Not with anger, not with scheming, but with calm observation. I watched as life continued, as my family continued in their patterns, unaware of the truth slowly emerging. I had no need to hurry the revelation, time would unfold it in its own way. Patience, I reminded myself, is not weakness. It is quiet power. And in that patience, I began to see the path toward a resolution that would not humiliate, but quietly restore balance, and finally, respect. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon when the truth finally revealed itself, not with drama, not with shouting, but with the kind of subtle clarity that only patience can bring. I was in the sunlit living room, folding freshly laundered clothes, when my granddaughter's friend, a young executive, called unexpectedly. The conversation seemed casual at first, until a name was mentioned, the CEO I had long known through charitable projects and advisory letters. The young man chuckled, almost embarrassed. I never realized your grandmother is the one who signs some of our most important approvals. Honestly, she's the one who keeps everything running smoothly. I felt a strange calm wash over me. No vindication, no gloating, just recognition of a quiet truth that I had long suspected but had allowed life to unfold before fully understanding. Later that evening, I watched my family bustling about, caught up in their ambitions, their petty judgments, their assumptions about my place in their lives. They had labeled me a failure, dismissed my opinions, and overlooked my wisdom. Yet, I now knew that their ignorance was irrelevant. My value was never dependent on their acknowledgement, it had existed, quietly, in the work I had done, the guidance I had given, and the decisions I had influenced without fanfare. I chose to remain silent. There was no need to confront, to correct, or to boast. My presence alone, calm and steady, now carried a weight that no words could convey. I noticed subtle changes almost immediately. My son sought my advice more openly, my daughter paused before dismissing my suggestions, and even my grandchildren began to look at me with newfound respect, not forced but natural, born from the quiet authority I had always carried. That night, I sat by the window, sipping tea, reflecting on the journey. The betrayal, the whispers, the broken trust, all of it had been painful, yes, but it had taught me a deeper lesson about boundaries, respect, and the strength that comes from holding one's dignity. I realized that life's justice is often silent, invisible, and unfolds in ways that words cannot capture. It doesn't need revenge. It doesn't need humiliation. It simply reveals itself to those who are patient, wise, and strong enough to endure. In the days that followed, I continued my life much as before, but with a renewed sense of peace. I no longer chased approval or validation from my family. I nurtured my grandchildren, shared gentle advice when it was welcomed, and focused on what truly mattered, my health, my quiet projects, and the small joys of ordinary life. And when my son casually mentioned a business meeting I had once indirectly influenced, I smiled, keeping the knowledge to myself. There was no need for recognition. I had learned the power of patience, of observation, and of quiet dignity. I had learned that influence is not measured by who notices it, but by the difference it makes. The world may label you a failure, I thought, but your own heart knows the truth. And in that quiet knowledge lies a freedom no betrayal can ever take away. As I closed my eyes that night, I felt the weight of years lift from my shoulders. I was calm, wise, and emotionally strong. And in the gentle rhythm of my own heartbeat, I finally understood that dignity, patience, and self-respect are the truest victories life can offer.